Just so that you know, welcome. Good morning. It is Wednesday, 18th of May, just after 10. And we're going to have an interesting discussion this morning. And I'm just going to kick off, if I may, just putting a little bit of a poll, launching a little poll, and would really value everybody participating on this poll. It's just asking the question around where are you as far as the exemption is concerned. So you will all be aware that we've got a number of issues as a result of the Court's decision that took place on the 16th of February. And through different advisories that we've seen from National Treasury have actually said that if you want to apply for exemption from the Preferential Procurement, from provisions in the Preferential Procurement Policy Framework Act, you're welcome to do that. They have been granting exemption. They are working furiously on that. A press release that came out 2 days ago said that they have granted exemption to 110 entities so far. I did put a question through to ask them what is the status. But if you could just let us know. So whether you have requested exemption, if you've not yet, let us know. If you have submitted a request for exemption, but you've not yet received a response, we'd like to know that. If you submitted and it was declined, we'd like to know that. And then a little bit about the nature of the exemption. Was it the entire Act, the PPPFA Act, on specific transactions, or the entire Act on all your procurement, or was it exemption from three provisions on specific, or exemption on 3 provisions on all procurement, or what would the other options be? So would be very keen to understand the extent to which you have done that. And some interesting things. Kevin can see the results coming in. Kevin, the folk that are online can't see these figures yet, but we've got less than 50% of the people that participated so far. So we'd really encourage you to just give us a bit of a feel. Now, whilst that's going, we are going to talk about what happens once you've got exemption. And we've got very fortunate to have Kevin Naik with us this morning. And Kevin, for those who don't know Kevin, Kevin, I don't know is it right to call you a veteran in public procurement? And you wouldn't be offended.
35 years experience.
Kevin, that makes you a veteran. And sincerely, we're really, really honored to have you join us. And Kevin, I wonder if you wouldn't maybe just kick off and just give us a bit of background on Kevin and tell us about yourself. I know you spent a considerable amount of time at National Treasury right during the transformation process, but I think you were in one of the provincial departments before you even went to Treasury. Is that right?
That's correct, Sean.
And tell us a bit about that. Where were you and when did you join Treasury? But just tell us a bit about Kevin before Treasury.
Yeah, thank you very, very much, Sean. Thank you very much for the opportunity also to be on your show today.
Sure.
It is much appreciated. This is my first time. As I said to you before, that it wasn't always possible due to the fact that I was engaged in some projects. I've got some time. It is possible for me to join the session, and I hope I can do it. I hope I can do it more frequently. In the next few weeks.
Thank you.
Yes. But before I joined Treasury, I was based in Cape Town, where I was, under the previous government dispensation. old colored affairs, internal affairs,
Wow.
and there I was first in HR, and then I went to provisioning administration, which it was
Provisioning.
called provisioning administration. Yes. Today it's called the Western Cape Education Department. I've heard there was somebody who introduced herself, and she's based at that same department where I was many years ago. They when the provisioning administration system started, I moved into that specific environment, gained all the knowledge in terms of the old PAS or FAS system.
Yes.
Yes, and then in 1995, with the formation of the new government, I was seconded to the Northern Cape Education Department, because the Northern Cape at that stage did not have any experience. It was basically in Gauteng, Western Cape, KZN. So I was seconded there for a year to assist them to establish the provisioning and logistics management division. Then in 1996, I was then promoted to National Treasury, and there I started. Then in 1996, it wasn't known as National Treasury.
It was something else. It was another name.
Yes, it was a Department of State Expenditure. So there was the Department of Finance, there was the Department of State Expenditure, and I was at the Department of State Expenditure, what we call the division that dealt with logistics management. But then there was also the National State Tender Board.
Right.
That was part of the Department of State Expenditure. When government started with the financial reform process, which eventually gave effect to the PFMA, the Departments of Finance and State Expenditure, they amalgamated to form National Treasury. And then there was a specific division within Treasury that was known as the Office of the Supply Chain Management. And that is where I was attached to. So I was at Treasury for 18 years.
Wow.
And yes, long time. When I left Treasury in 2014, I was the Director of Supply Chain Management Training, responsible for, among others, professionalization. I started the process of professionalization with CIPS, with SIPS.
Yeah.
Started to develop the competency levels, which Treasury launched, I think, in 2015, that competency dictionary.
Yes.
Very much instrumental in establishing unit standards. Also on the Certificate of Supply Chain Management, the qualification 74149, and those government unit standards that's applicable to the Introduction to Supply Chain Management, 11934, demand management, acquisition management, contract management, ethical standards, and the bid committee. So I was very much instrumental in that. When I left the Treasury at the end of August 2014, I joined a company called Deloitte as a senior manager, and I was responsible also there to establish the Supply Chain Academy. I wasn't very long there, and then I thought now it's time for me to move on.
The entrepreneurial bug bit you, hey?
Yes. So I started my own practice in 2015. But during my tenure at National Treasury, I was very fortunate in the sense that I was part and parcel of the team which implemented supply chain management, the concept of supply chain management and supply chain management per se, to national and provincial departments. And 2 years later, we extended that same principle to the municipalities. I was also involved in the development of the regulations for municipal supply chain management. So that regulations and everything that went into that, it's in my head.
So we can blame you, hey?
Yes.
Very good, Kevin.
So,
and I guess you're doing lots of training now, and
yes,
also some consulting work.
That's right. So most of the work that I've done since 2015 was basically to train on the various unit standards.
Very good.
Did some consulting work on irregular, fruitless, and wasteful expenditure.
Yeah.
Assist some institutions with their supply chain policy, SOPs, and also on the issue of forensic investigations. There's a particular company in Centurion who've utilized me to assist them with forensic investigations and to look at the non-compliance of SEM procedures. For the past few weeks.
Yeah, let's tell us about what you're doing now, because that's very important around this discussion today.
Yes. Thank you, Sean. I was contacted to one of the national departments in Pretoria, where I was where I was responsible to look at the contract management policy. There's a framework which National Treasury issued last year.
Yeah.
Start to implement the framework within the department, put together a contract register, contract management policy, which was approved. And then also recently, since March, until my contract expired in the middle of April, I was very much involved in this process, which everyone is now the buzzword, preferential procurement,
yeah,
and the exemption from it. So I think it's imperative also, Sean, the way you and I discussed, is to share some of those experiences, and then it might also be useful to the officials who are at government departments and municipalities.
Absolutely. Let's just have a look then before we get into that, Kevin. I'm going to ask everybody just that if you have not yet participated in the poll, just to quickly put in your quick little input, and then I'm going to end this, and then we can have a look at where things stand. So if there's anyone yet, just to your last entry into the poll. Okay, let's end the poll. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We'll share this with everybody. Let's have a look at this thing, Kevin. You can see those results. So there's a number of people that haven't yet even requested exemption. So, a quarter of those online have not yet requested exemption. So maybe we need to, before we talk about the subject, once you've got exemption, maybe we should just talk a little bit about why you should apply for exemption. I think that would be important. There's a bunch of people who have requested but not yet received response. And then it looks like there is a number of people that have, so almost 30% have received exemption from the entire PPPFA, all provisions on all procurement. And there's a small number that have received exemption on specific transactions.
Okay.
And then it looks like there is a number, not a lot of people, that have just got exemption on those 3 little provisions, which is the threshold and the formula provision. And there are a couple of people with some other options. I wonder if those who have put other options in, if you wouldn't mind just going to the chat and just telling us what those other options might be. But maybe let's just kick off before we get into this, Kevin, to talk a little bit about why is it that you should apply for exemption. And you and I can talk about this, but let's just talk about that. Why is it important to get exemption? Your perspective.
Yes, colleagues, as we know, the communication which National Treasury have sent out since the 25th of February this year there were quite a few advisory notes. So we currently sitting in a conundrum where we know that there's no regulations in place.
Yeah.
So in the absence of regulations, we can basically do nothing. So service delivery basically has come to a standstill. National Treasury, they have realized this, and they have advised organs of state what the process is that needs to be followed. Obviously, the new financial year have started on the 1st of April. Users in the various departments, they require goods and services, which is on the procurement plans. Now they need delivery on it. But unfortunately, we are reliant upon the prescripts and legislation issued by National Treasury. But because of the Concord decisions and the fact that National Treasury has now asked for more clarity, we're stuck in the sense that you cannot do anything. But National Treasury gave a sort of a outcome. And the outcome which they provided is to say, organs of state, nothing is lost. We advising you that you can apply for exemption from
provisions of the Act.
You can apply for exemption from the Act number 5 of 2000. Now, if we go back to the Constitution, we know what the Constitution says in section 217, 2 and 3 about a framework. So currently there's no framework in place, which means that we have to go to Treasury, in fact, to the Minister of Finance, because the power is vested in the Minister of Finance to provide exemption from the PPPFA. So the request should be addressed to the Minister of Finance, asking them for exemption to procure
from provisions
outside
of the PPPFA Act.
To procure outside the PPPFA. Now, the question is, how are you going to approach National Treasury? So there should be a formal request addressed to the Minister of Finance, indicating the commodities that you would require exemption from. Now, Treasury in the latest communication or the media release, as Sean alluded earlier, indicated it takes about 72 hours. I think it's, Sean, maybe it's much quicker now, because that time when they have initiated this process, everybody jumped on this bandwagon and they were inundated with requests. So the officials at Treasury, and there are only a few of them, there's not much capacity within Treasury. So they had to work, they were inundated with requests, and the workload was very high. So it took a little bit of time, because when Treasury get the request, they must then send it to the Minister of Finance. They has to go through the various channels, and the minister is not always available. But I think that process is much better now.
Kevin, let's just pause a little bit there, because you said something which you and I might differ on, and I want to be sure that we're on the same page on this one. You mentioned that you can apply for exemption on specific commodities. It looks like, based on the survey, that a number of people have got exemption on all procurement. So I know the advisory that came out on the 3rd of March said that you can apply for specific transactions, and those are the high priority ones that you've got to get going on. But look where we are now. I mean, we're in the middle of May. We're 2 months into the financial year. This is not working out as Treasury originally thought it was. that this would be quick over. We'd get a decision from the Con Court. This is dragging on. So I don't know. I mean, are you on the same page as I am that you rather apply for full exemption on all procurement?
Yes. What I wanted to say, Sean, initially, when National Treasury communicated with I think it was mostly with the national departments in Pretoria, those guys in that particular forum, they've indicated, this was initially,
Right.
they've indicated for those commodities which were procurement ready.
Yeah.
And thereafter, Treasury then issued another advisory note on the 11th of March to say basically for all procurement. You know?
Right.
So I basically now taking it in those.
Okay, my apologies. Okay, good.
Yes. So now they've opened it up that you can apply for all the commodities. So the request is to National Treasury. So in your request to National Treasury, you need to indicate to them that we want exemption from all our commodities on the procurement plans.
Yeah.
You know, you don't need to attach your procurement plans because obviously procurement plans already went to the Provincial Treasury or to the National Treasury.
Yes.
So in your response to the Provincial Treasury or to National Treasury, you need to indicate that for those items on the procurement plans, it was already approved in the municipality, in the entity, or in the department, and it has already been submitted to either the National Treasury or the Provincial Treasury. So once you've provided that confirmation, the process will go much quicker.
Why must they get exemption? Why did Treasury issue that advisory to say stop tenders? And they did that because if you do issue a tender without the exemption, referencing Preferential Procurement Regulations 2017, there's a very high probability that that tender will be declared invalid.
100%.
And that's why they said. And so, if you are putting out tenders and quotations, even above 30,000 Rand is what they said, and you have not got the exemption and you're still following the 2017, 80, 20, 90, 10 stuff, there's a probability that those contracts will be declared invalid.
Invalid, yes.
And that's why it's important to get this done so that they can start procuring and ensuring that what they procure is not declared invalid. I mean, that contract then is null and void. You're going to have to start again anyway. Is that right?
On that particular note, there's interesting issue that we discussed a few weeks ago. Now, the first advisory note which National Treasury issued, on that second page, those 3 bullet points,
yes,
where they said that those tenders that were already finalized before the 16th of February, they can proceed with that. But those ones which have not been advertised must now be kept in abeyance.
In abeyance.
In abeyance.
Hopefully everybody understood what that meant. Eh?
That one in abeyance. It must, you must keep it in suspense. Keep it back. Hold it back. The third bullet point, no new procurement must be initiated.
Yeah.
Now I want to focus on that second bullet point. Those ones that went maybe through a process of
but committees.
The specification committee.
Yeah.
The specification committee.
Yeah.
Those ones that have at that point just stopped. It could have been also, Sean, it could have been also those ones that have already been evaluated. Those ones that have already been evaluated. And it didn't went through BAC for approval. So that one were also kept in abeyance. Because now, from a practical perspective, when Treasury said that you must not advertise from a practical perspective, it means you have to stop all those tenders. You cannot advertise. Those that were advertised, were evaluated, could not be awarded.
There's
that
a problem.
process was
Yeah.
also stopped.
Yeah.
Right? Which means that you could not proceed. Now that you have received exemption, because remember all those ones that were supposed to be kept in abeyance, they were dealt with in terms of the regulation of 2017, which was no longer applicable. Now that you will receive exemption, what will happen with those ones which you've kept in abeyance? I think it's
very important. May I ask that we maybe just hold on that one for now? Let's come back to that in a while.
Yes.
So I mean, what we're saying is you've got to apply for exemption. There's a process to do it. It can be done. Treasury are committing to do it as quickly as possible. Once you've got that exemption, you can carry on with your procurement. We've also got a number of people in MFMA and local government. They're heading for coming up for New Year. The last thing they want now is not to spend their money. They've got to get going and they've got to get their tenders out, and they've got to do that fast as well. So, if you're in the public sector, get exemption. Now, just before we move on, there is a chance that the Court can come back and say, by the way, the 2017 regulations do apply. Or they could come back and say, by the way, they don't apply. Okay, either way, but there's going to be a decision quite soon from the Court, we hope soon, from the Court, Constitutional Court, on this issue that we're dealing with at the moment. And by the way, if there's anybody who's sitting and waiting for Provincial Treasury or National Treasury to issue a circular or an instruction to change things, they can't. This is a Court decision that was made. Treasury cannot get out of this by issuing a circular or an instruction. So don't expect Treasury to issue that and bail us out. It's not going to happen. But it could be that Treasury that the Court comes back and says 2017 does not apply, in which case we've got months of this issue. So this is not necessarily just a short-term thing. It could be a couple of months that this situation that we're in lasts. So don't hold back. I mean, would you agree, Kevin? Get that exemption done, because there's a big risk that you may not be able to procure anything for months and months and months without that exemption.
That's correct, Sean.
Yeah,
I agree with you 100% there, because it's important that procurement must take place, and that you must have a mechanism in place to do that procurement. Okay.
So that's about. We've just answered the question now for those. Kevin, just from myself personally, I have said to any organ of state, if you want a template or something, or you want some help on how to apply for exemption, contact us. We'll help you out. I think I'm not charging anybody for that. I don't know if you are. I think it's in everyone's interest in the country that we get this going, so we can get the economy moving again. We can get service delivery going again. So just to say that if anyone has wants to know how to do it, then just reach out to myself. I'm sure Kevin will support as well. There are a number of people online that will do that if you want some help on just framing that application, because there's some important points in there around public interest and a couple of things like that needs to be done. Kevin, let's move on to the other kind of 70% of the people that are online now, and just talk about those that have got exemption. What do you do?
those ones who got in the full exemption.
The full exemption. So maybe let's just split this into two parts. There's two groupings. Those that have got exemption on all provisions of the PPPFA.
Yes.
So there's no 80-20, 90-10. There's no objective criteria. There's no acceptable bids. All of that they've got exemption from. And then there's another group, which seems to be a smaller group online today, which is exemption just from those three little provisions, yes, the threshold and the formula. So let's talk about the first one, which seems to be the majority, which says you've got exemption now from all provisions in the PPPFA. What do you now do?
Okay. Yes. Colleagues, this is where the show starts. You've received that data from Treasury, and now the practical side of things must now kick into operation. So what is the process that you're going to follow? You might have a supply chain management policy where in that policy you have you might have a section on preferential procurement. But at this point in time, there's no framework in place. So that policy cannot be amended, or you cannot develop a new policy because there must be a framework in place, and currently there's no framework in existence. So on that particular aspect of it, what we're saying, unfortunately, we cannot have a new policy in place in the absence of regulations.
A new preference policy in place.
A new preference policy, because
we need a policy for the organ of state, but that policy needs to change.
Yes.
What must change?
But now in the process, as an interim measure, Sean said earlier, we don't know when we are going to get a response from the Concord. It can be any moment. If the Concord decides that the status quo maintains, then we carry on. But for now, as an interim measure, you need to put a certain process in place. The advice that you can do is that we cannot get the new policy, preferential procurement policy in place. So the advice would be to go to your accounting officer to say, from a supply chain perspective, this is what we want to do. As an interim measure, maybe a period of 3 or 4 months, and then after you can review it. I would advise to play safe, to be on the safe side. Let's use basically price as the determining factor.
Yeah.
If it's functionality,
this is what you've done at the department you were working at, the national department you were working at.
That's correct.
Yeah.
So what we have done to say, okay, we've put a policy directive in place, which was approved by the accounting officer. And in that directive, we said for services will be, as usually, first be evaluated on functionality. On functionality. Once you've gone through that process, the next criteria that we'll use is just price. It's just price. And as I said, use that as an interim, see what happened, and maybe within the next few months, we'll get a response from the Concord, or there might be new regulations, and that will give us direction. But as an interim, you must have a policy strategy in place. And this is what I have advised the department, and this is what we have done. We went to the accounting officer approved it. So that is the process that is currently followed within the department. With functionality, and then it's price.
So it is important that the policy in PFMA and MFMA organs of state be updated, and that update must take all reference to the 2017 regulations out.
Yes.
And if you've got full exemption on all provisions of the PPPFA, you must then ensure that your policy and your SOPs state very, very clearly that the award is based solely on price.
That's correct. That's correct.
And that's then the recommendation. That's the first priority. And one of the things we've seen, I see that Mr. Harry Mashar is with us, who heads up Northwest Provincial Treasury SEM there. I think he was also saying that one of the things that they're seeing is organs of state are getting exemption, but then they're still taking time to actually get their policies updated before they can start. So, start making those changes to those policies even before the exemption comes through, so that you can quickly respond.
Exactly. So the processes, the two processes must run concurrently.
Yeah.
So while you have applied for exemption from National Treasury, from the PPPFA, at the same time put that process in place to get approval from the accounting officer. Put those documentation in place, but wait until the exemption approval, and then it can be submitted to the accounting officer.
Get it done quickly, right?
For approval,
Right. So that's the key change then, and then your bid committee system needs to be informed and advised. This is how we're going to do it. It's no longer 80-20, 90-10. If you've got exemption from all the provisions, it's now going to be functionality, meet the threshold, then price.
Yes.
I guess we're going to still need to be very aware on how we deal with things like normally low bids and stuff like that. But that's the basic process that needs to be followed. Now, we've got a question from Tundi, and she's raised her hand, and I think I know what the question is, because she's raising a similar question on LinkedIn. But let's ask Tundi to come in and raise her question, and let's see if we can try and give a response on this very important question. Which go ahead, Tundi.
Good morning, colleagues. Thanks, Sean. Yes,
good morning.
Said you're right. Here's the thing, Sean, that I want to find out. The sad thing about all of this is the empowerment element that's been taken away by all this mess. And now, if we are saying let's evaluate only on price, my first question is, are we saying preferential procurement is now illegal? The reason why I'm asking that is because the regulation has been deemed unconstitutional, but there are certain elements of the regulation that we have taken and still continue with them because we know they're not so wrong. For example, functionality. We are still going to choose to use functionality when we evaluate tenders, and we can have them in the policy. Why now are we taking out the preferential points out simply because the whole regulation? Because my issue is that it's not the act that is not constitutional, it's the regulation itself. So yes, you can give me a exemption to not comply with the act, but will I be wrong if I decide in that interim policy, I still want to introduce some preference procurement of some sort and still do the 80-20, 90-10? Thank you.
I guess this comes down to Section 2172 and Section 2173 of the Constitution, Kevin. So Tundi is saying, can an organ of state, even if they've received, she's asking, can an organ of state, even if they've received exemption, can the organ of state still apply some system of preference so that we can continue to advance transformation in the country?
Okay. Sean, there's another hand raised. Maybe we can.
Should we ask Fikile? Go ahead, Fikile. Let's get your question.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you, Kevin. I am partly covered by the question that has been asked by Tundi, because if you look at most of the exemptions that we have received from National Treasury, they emphasize compliance to Section 217 of the Constitution without highlighting any part of Section 217. It's like you must comply to the entire 217. So if we take away preference, wouldn't that lead to non-compliance to Section 217. And then my second question is, if I heard Kevin well, he referred to requesting exemption on all procurement that is in the procurement plan. And we know that the procurement plan starts from 500,000. And in terms of the advisory note that was given by National Treasury, it refers to requirements from 30,000 and above. So if we talk only of the procurement plan, then we are losing out on requirements that are between 30,000 and 500,000. And if you take into account the whole concept of the request for the exemption for all procurement, it covers everything, which will include everything that is outside the scope of the procurement plan. And National Treasury had to issue 2 advisory notes to specifically clarify the issue of the 30,000, because when they used the 10 bids, they got us confused because we thought that when they say bids, they're referring to those requirements that are advertised in the tender bulletin. Thank you.
Kevin, should we deal with that last question first? And let's
Okay.
just get that out the way. So,
Yes.
yeah, and I think you were just trying to make the point around all procurement, and not just what's in the procurement plan, but certainly you have a procurement plan. Are you saying you apply for exemption for all procurement, quotations and tenders?
100%. Yes. So
Okay.
the request for exemption are for all procurement above 30,000 Rand.
Can I maybe just make a slight amendment to that one?
Okay.
Don't put in the 30,000. Just say all procurement.
All procurement is fine.
Would that be okay?
Yes. Yes. So for all procurement, but then the reason why I talked about the procurement plans were to give an indication to National Treasury and the Provincial Treasury that those procurements which are on the procurement plans which have been submitted is inclusive of it.
Okay. Okay.
I've spoken to some of my ex-colleagues at National Treasury, and that was just an advice which I received, would then sort of strengthen the motivation.
Got you. They're not expecting copies of the procurement plan to be attached. No. Okay.
Yes.
I know there are some that have thought about doing that. Okay, so that deals with that one. Nombolelo, just hold a second with your question. Let's just quickly talk about the other question around the system of preference, Kevin.
Yes.
Because I've been toying with this as well and saying, if you've got exemption, does it mean that you still, can you still apply 80-20-90-10? And I'm not sure that we can actually do that. What are your thoughts, Kevin? Just maybe talk a little bit about 2172 and 2173.
Yes. If you've asked, and that was also some of the discussions that we had, that if you've asked for exemption for full exemption from
all provisions in the PPPFA. Mm-hmm.
Yes. It means that you cannot apply the 80-20 and 90-10 system.
Does it mean that, or does it mean that it's optional?
That's what they convey to us. You cannot apply that system, because that's specifically the reason why you've applied for exemption from it, because now you want to use other criteria. I know in one of the discussions there was a question that was raised, but can you apply a 70-30, or can you apply
something else? Yeah.
60-40? But unfortunately, you cannot do that also, because
and why is that?
It must be prescribed. It must be prescribed.
So 2172 says the organ of state must implement a policy, can implement a policy that provides for preference. And then 2173 says, however, that framework with which you develop that policy must be nationally legislated.
Yes.
Is that the issue?
That is the issue. That is the issue. You know.
So 2172 says you must implement a policy, but that policy needs to be, in terms of the framework. And then 2173 says, but that framework must be nationally legislated.
Yes. So we also looked at whether we want to apply a 60-40 or 70-30 system, you know. And then we were advised to say, guys, those specific issues in terms of section 2173, that you cannot put anything in place unless there is a framework in place.
And I think you were telling me earlier that you actually had some legal advice on that issue at the department that you were working at recently.
Exactly. There was a draft policy that we've developed, which we wanted to send through for approval.
That had a bit of a preference system in that draft policy?
Yes.
So the lawyer said no.
We put in the preference system there. In fact, we included there the 80-20 and 90-10 system. We included also some of the pre-qualification criteria. We included also some of the socioeconomic objectives from the 2011 regulation. So it's a combination of 2011, 2001, 2011, and 2017.
Yeah.
So we wanted to determine our own policy.
Yeah.
And then, you know, after the consultation of the inputs, we sent it through to legal services, and legal services came back to say, guys, and they've unpacked it. They really unpacked it by saying, you know, yes, we hear what you want to put in place, but we are guided by 2173. And 2173 says that there must be a framework in place. And until
which is nationally legislated.
Nationally legislated. Until such time that National Treasury issue new regulations, we cannot proceed with that policy. You know, so that is where we start. And then we decide, okay, right, now that we cannot proceed with our own policy because of the absence of regulations, we need to get a mechanism in place to ensure that, you know, we advertise, there is a criteria that will be applicable for evaluation. Now, to get to Thandi's question, we also looked at various objectives, like a preference system. We looked at whether we could apply price, we could apply SME development, we could apply women and youth, and some other criteria. But when we want to introduce that criteria, there must be some sort of guidance. Because if we say, yes, we want to allocate certain points for women and youth, how are we going to evaluate it? How are we going to measure it? And that is the process that needs to be thoroughly investigated and thoroughly documented. So we didn't have any time, you know, time was not on our side. So we need to put something in place to ensure that the show goes on. There's a lot of tenders there that needs to go out. There's a lot of tenders that needs to be evaluated. There's a lot of businesses that needs to be concluded. So we don't have time to all disposal.
But it sounds like it's not just time, Kevin. It's there isn't the legislative framework in place.
Yes.
Right.
Now,
when the new regulation comes out, then absolutely let's do what you're thinking of. Let's bring all those elements in with the new 2022 regulations. But until then, we don't have a framework. We don't have a legal basis on which to do it.
Yes. But what we said, Sean, to come back to Thandi's question also is to say, as an interim, as a short-term measure, because yes, the department is still committed to transformation. We still want to put those transformation objectives in the tenders. But if we're going to prolong the process, then there's certain services that needs to take place.
Yeah.
So let's
Okay.
look at the mechanism in the interim. I would say for the first few months, let's just use price.
Yeah.
But then
Got you.
we can look at other objectives that we also want to implement.
All right.
Because
Very
that is
good.
going to take some time.
Very good.
So,
very good.
and then we got an approval from the accounting office to say, yes, we're going to first apply price. And now we're going to look at the other objectives, because scorecards and all those kind of things that needs to kick in place. There's some consultation process. And as you can understand, it's quite a lengthy process. There's a legal process involved as well.
I understand that's also the position that President Natal have taken, KZN Treasury. I think Sanele Kormo's here. I think that advisory has also come out from that side as well. So, that's fairly consistent in terms of the general view. But there are a couple of questions coming through now, Kevin. Maybe we should just give people a chance to ask those. And we're going to kick off with Nombolelo. And just while Nombolelo is just giving us, Kevin, I'm just going to ask you to just move your computer screen a little bit to face a little bit away from the window. We're getting a very big glare at the moment on your screen. So if you just move there we go, that'll work. Thanks. Nombolelo, you go ahead. Tell us your question. Okay, Nombolelo is talking, but I can't hear. I don't know if anyone else can hear it, Nombolelo.
Two questions. One will be, if we have already applied for an exemption and didn't include all the procurements, can we reapply? We have not received a response yet. My question would be, can we reapply while we're still waiting for the other response from Treasury? And two, I need clarity. I heard that we can change the policy to make to accommodate the PPPFA amendments. So can we change the current policy, or we must make something on the side that will be approved by the accounting officer?
Nombolelo, just to get some context, are you with the PFMA organ of state or MFMA?
MFMA.
MFMA, okay.
Yes.
So your first question was, you've submitted, you've not yet received, or you have already received?
We have not received.
Okay. Yeah, I think what I am gathering is because organs of state submitted for just a few tenders initially, they are resubmitting, and that's why there's a huge workload at the moment, as there are multiple submissions going through from the same organ of state. And I think, I don't know, Nombolelo, maybe try, put it through, make reference to the one that you've submitted, just try and help Treasury deal with that issue. I don't know,
John,
if you've got any suggestions. Yes, who's that? Godfrey.
It's Godfrey. I just wanted to assist maybe Nombolelo in that one. I tried to raise my hands. I think nothing stops her from amending the previous one that she submitted. I just want to give her comfort that I did the same. Initially, when I started, I identified 3 critical requests that I needed to request, and then I got approval. Then I realized that in terms of the operations of the organization, we were behind because we need to report on a quarterly basis, and we couldn't report in terms of performance. Then we had to go back. I then went back to them and request exemption for all the activities that we have planned for this financial year. And then I got an approval yesterday. So In a nutshell, I think she needs to go back to them and submit that particular request with everything, perhaps in terms of their plan, and then she will get exempted.
Good one.
Thanks.
It looks like Khali Senyane is also suggesting the same thing. So there you are, Nombolelo. There's the answer to that first question. Let's just hold on responding to the next one. Nombolelo, is that okay?
Yes, thank you.
Very good. Fikile, let's just get your question, Fikile.
Thank you, Sean. I want to check that we know that in everything that we are doing in the past 3 months, the procurement legislative environment has been very dynamic. After the Constitutional Court judgment and the advisory notes, or I can't remember the sequence, then we had the draft regulations sent out for comments.
Yeah.
And if you look at the draft regulations, they still carry the spirit of the 80-20, the 90-10, and the initial thresholds that we had. So if we look at the fact that this is the spirit of the draft regulations, it means that the 80-20, the 90-10 is here to stay, unless if based on the inputs received, there are going to be amendments. So in determining the way forward, one took into account what is in the draft regulations, though they're not legislated, but at least they give an idea of the direction going forward. And then secondly, an area of concern, the issue of local production and content, local content. It's like it's falling away, but there is silence on the 6.2. Is that silence based on the fact that we are waiting for the promulgated regulations in the meantime? Because when there is a vacuum, then you have a problem. Chaos reigns where there is a vacuum. What is the status with the implementation of 6.2? Because we already had problems with the application of 6.2, because we are applying 6.2. Normally I say we are doing compliance exercise, we're ticking the box that we're complying. But if we can't actually measure the output of 6.2, then why are we doing it?
Sure. Okay. Let's put local production, local content as a discussion point. We did anticipate that one. Let's just quickly get Henry. I see you've dropped your hand. Who is next? Yawa, go ahead.
Thank you, Sean. Good morning, colleagues.
Good morning. Good morning.
My question is on 2 issues. Firstly, the Constitution and the BEE Act, whether it is legal to have a preferential procurement policy, even if you have been exempted on all procurement, on all provisions of the Preferential Procurement Act, in terms of the Constitution or in terms of the BEE.
That's the big question.
I think that's the main thing. Only if that one can be answered, then we will be able to have a way forward as to whether we apply the 80-20, 90-10.
What was your thought on what Kevin was saying? That
was my understanding, that if you have been exempted from all provisions, then you have been exempted to apply the 80-20 preferential procurement. And it means even your policy, you do not have the policy, the framework, there's no framework in short. That was my understanding. So there's different interpretations, even if we call National Treasury or other colleagues. This one will say that and the other one would say that. So it's only that part actually that we need clarity on, because I believe that it's an issue of legal issue and also aging. because we need to have answers come a 2022 audit at the end of the financial year next year. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you. Riaz, Jetam. Morning.
Thank you, Sean, and good morning to all the colleagues. Mine, I think, is just going to be a few issues. I'm from a municipality. I think the first one is the turnaround time. I know that Treasury has all these national government departments, provincial government departments, municipalities, SOEs, everybody is making application. But the issue for me is the turnaround time in terms of the response. Our municipality has made a submission. It's now over 5 weeks, and we still haven't had any response in terms of the exemption. Now, we are now coming towards the end of May. The financial year for municipalities ends in June. What we have now on our side as a municipality, we've got a backlog because we cannot move until we get the approval from Treasury itself. So I think that is the first issue in terms of the turnaround time and the long lead time that we have. Two is all municipalities are now submitting and finalizing budgets for the new financial year, which has to be approved by council by the end of this month for implementation on the 1st of July. We now in a catch-22 because some of the allocated amounts that we have in the current financial year, because we have not received any response from Treasury itself, means even if we go out on the SCM processes now in terms of tenders, and we just base it on price only, we might not be able to go through the SCM processes to finalize those bids in this financial year, meaning then it might have an impact in terms of the budget for the next financial year. Now, the third issue from my side is this also impacts in terms of the different grants that the municipalities have. Because some of the grants will not be spent before the end of the financial year because of this Constitutional Court judgment, and now we're waiting for the exemption. How is National Treasury going to treat either municipalities or national or provincial government departments? Because I think from our side, as well as most government departments, we're going to have a case where grants are not going to be spent before the end of the financial year. Do we then still have to go through the same process where we have to now make application to Treasury itself to roll over those grants into the new financial year? And what happens if we do not get approval in terms of the rollover of those grants? So I think for municipalities, because of the time frame, our financial year ends in June. There is not much time, and unfortunately, we have to wait now for Treasury to come back to us and tell us whether the submission that we made to them, whether they have now approved it. But if we get our response too late, by then the budget for next year will have already been approved by council. And I think all municipalities are going to sit with the same problem where some of the bids that they had in this financial year, the municipalities might not be able to cater for it in the next budget for the 2022-2023 financial year. Thanks.
Yeah, that's worrying, eh? The 5 weeks, Kevin.
It's too long.
I'm gonna put a doing a quick poll that I'm gonna put out. Do you want to start responding to some of those? Henry has raised his hand. Henry, I think you did raise in the chat that you differ with the opinion on the 80-20-90-10.
Hi, Sean. Yeah. So I hear the reasoning in terms of saying, but then, in terms of the Constitution, Section 217. But my point then is, if we take that argument, okay, what is the legal basis? Where in the legislation does it currently say entities, not necessarily departments. If I want to increase my scorecard, which is a business imperative, I want to increase my scorecard, I can bring in then DE under my functional requirements in a case like that. I'm just, or I can say that, you know, price is 40% and functionality 60% of my award criteria. Where does it, because nowhere else in legislation does it say, how should I award?
Okay.
It's an open, it's just an open thing.
Yeah. The 217 says there must be a framework, Henry, and there isn't one.
Sean, do you want me just to?
So maybe, so let me just then continue with that argument.
Yeah.
So can I then now go and start saying that 80% is going to be functional in my award criteria? So obviously you have to pass functionality, but then if I award 80% is functionality, 20% is price, or 90% is functionality, 10% is price. I know it must be cost effective. I know in the Constitution, but can I start using those types of criteria? Nothing stops me doing that.
Kevin?
Yeah, Henry, I don't want to make a long story short, but there was a legal dispute. I'm now just trying, while you spoke on it, I was trying to apply my mind. And I think it was on the 2001 regulations. I'm speaking under correction, but I think the 2001 regulations talked about functionality as part of price. Now, when I was at Treasury, there were legal issues. And eventually, with the 2011 regulations, Treasury took functionality completely out of the regulations. So functionality will not be dealt with as an criteria for evaluation, but it's a process. Because remember, when you deal with services, obviously you will have to evaluate first on functionality. So there's the weightings and those kind of things that you will have to look at. But when it comes to and criteria for award, there was basically the 80-20 and the 90-10, and then, you know, in terms of 2017, the pre-qualification and all those kind of things. Now, the preference point system doesn't incorporate the functionality part of it. Functionality is still a process that will be dealt with outside this particular, if I put it in inverted commas, a preference point system. And I think if we look at the 2022 regulations, which Treasury have issued, there's also no mention of functionality as a preference point system.
Okay.
So functionality will be dealt with outside a preference point system for services. As we know, that it's not applicable for goods, but the criteria to use for a preference point system and for reward, in this case, what we have done in the department was to say, we look at it holistically, we look at the process. There are certain services that needs to be dealt with. So for services, we're still going to evaluate on functionality. But when it comes to the other criteria, there's unfortunately no preference point system in place that we can use.
Okay.
But we will use as an interim measure, we will use price.
Yeah.
Price is not cast in stone.
Yeah.
When we get the other criteria sorted out, it can still be added, you know, but this is only as an interim.
Okay, I think maybe
Henry, let's maybe.
No, I won't continue. Just in the interest of time, I won't continue with this.
Yeah.
But the reason why that 2011, where the functionality is because it kind of conflicted with the act.
With the act,
The act is no longer there then. So that was the reason why they took it out. But let's not.
Thanks, Henry. I think you've asked some important questions. Let's ask Sanele to come in. Sanele, just while you're coming in, I'm just going to launch a quick little poll as well, just which you can, those who are on, there's 2 questions. If you've submitted but haven't received approval, when did you submit? And then if the second question is, if you have received exemption, how long, what was the turnaround? Go ahead, Sanele.
Thanks, Sean. You know, I think Kevin has covered quite a lot of what I was going to say, because in the current situation that we are facing, our evaluation has changed. So in any tender that you evaluate, you've got these phases of evaluation. The first one being the administrative compliance, where you check all the correctness of the completion of the document. And then you decide what follows. Either it could be the functionality or the mandatory requirements or the minimum requirements. But the functionality itself is for evaluating your terms of reference specifically, or the specifications. They were wrong. National Treasury was wrong to include them in the PPPFA regulations, because the regulations were meant for empowerment. And functionality does not actually form part of the empowerment. It's just meant to evaluate the terms of reference or the specifications. So that is why now there's this confusion. So there's a second phase of evaluation, which is functionality or technical evaluation. So I think it cannot be mixed with the 80-20 computation of points. So it's just a separate evaluation. So the colleagues must understand it in that sense, that evaluation of functionality is a separate matter altogether. And how you need to do it now is you must cater for it in your SCM policy. So in the current situation where we can't review our policies because of the uncertainty, maybe the accounting officer can amend the SCM policy based on an addendum to say we will be changing these sections, and such somewhere the space is right to amend, to review the whole procurement policy. Then you can do all of those things, including the negotiation. But if you look at the infrastructure procurement, they have made it very much easier for their practitioners, because in the standard for uniformity for 2019, there is functionality catered for there. So it means if you're procuring a complex or specialized infrastructure project, you already have CIDB making those provisions that you can use functionality as an evaluation criteria. So they don't link it with the 2017 regulation, but a standalone evaluation phase. So that's how I think it's the colleagues need to understand the whole functionality issue. Thanks.
Good one. All right. Thank you. Kevin, let's come back and be sure that we are focused on trying to give the colleagues that are on the benefit of your experience and your perspectives, so that they can keep things going there. I saw you were making some notes of some of the questions. Do you want to respond to some of those?
Yes. The question raised by the lady Yawa, I think it's difficult for us to respond to that, because I think it's a legal issue. But I think it's a good point that she raised. So maybe Sean, that particular question can maybe escalate it to maybe some of the legal guys,
So that's on the local production, local content question that you raised.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. The question raised by Riaz, the turnaround time, and I look at the response also on the polls, 5 weeks is too much. I just want to check with Riaz how did they submit the application? Was it through a provincial treasury, or was it directly to National Treasury, to that dedicated email address which they have provided? If you could maybe just give us a sense, in terms of that, because Treasury doesn't take that long.
Shouldn't it?
I know our initial response to Treasury, even before they sent out the communication, there was a meeting that was held with the CPO internally, and he then said, "Guys, we are busy with an advisory note." So we then developed our communication to Treasury for exemption, and that didn't take long. But they responded to us to say, "Please indicate the categories of procurement that you want." That was even before they issued the last advisory note to say for all procurement. But even our response to them, I think it was about 5 to 7 days, could be less, but it wasn't 5 weeks, So somewhere it got stuck. So I just want to get the sense from you, how did they submit it to National Treasury? Was it directly to Treasury? Have they followed it up? Because somehow I think it needs to be followed up with either provincial treasury or directly with National Treasury, because as you said, that the end of June is the end of the financial year in the municipality.
Yeah.
And if they haven't spent the money, it's going to affect those municipal grants that they receive.
Yes.
Yes, if I can just respond to Kevin, we submitted direct to National Treasury in terms of the email that we've had. And since then, we have been making follow-ups with them. I think for the first 3 or 4 weeks, there was no response actually in terms of all the reminder emails that we sent. Only in the last week, we've been told now that it has been submitted to the office of the minister and it has been uploaded. That's what we've been told now. But my concern is the turnaround time that it has been taking. We've even engaged with the provincial treasury to try to assist us because we were not getting any response at all from the submission that we made. Not even an email to say that the municipality has got your application and will be dealing with it. No response at all until just in the last week. Thanks.
Very good. So I think it sounds like he's done everything that he should have done.
Yes.
And yeah, so this poll, if you can please respond to this, because I'm going to use this in a response through to Treasury, just to say I think it wasn't right to put out a release to say that the turnaround time is 72 hours. There is one response that we've received so far where the turnaround was less than a week. So if we can use this little survey, as rough and ready as it is, to try and do that, we'll certainly do that just to raise the point. Kevin, let's just unpack the local production, local content one.
Yes.
So the only place where local production, local content finds its legal home right now is the 2017 regulations. There's no act that has prescribed this. It's only in the 2017 regulations. So without the 2017 regulations, those circulars have no legal basis.
100% correct, Sean.
So does it mean then that also because this is not mentioned in the 2172 nor 2173, it's not a framework issue, it's not a preference issue, does it mean then that it is optional under the circumstances for an organ of state to apply those?
Sean, I was in a meeting about, I think, more than a month ago excuse me. And this meeting was a meeting which DTIC called with all the DGs, counting officers
National.
of national departments.
Okay.
And where they talk about the whole issue of the 2017 regulations, and they re-emphasized that it is still government's policy to apply local production and content. The only concern at this stage that DTI have, and we as practitioners, it is nowhere legislated. It's nowhere legislated. The only option at this point in time that we can utilize to apply local production and content is by means of a special condition of contract. I know National Treasury and DTI, I think they are in communication in this regard. And I'm supposed that soon there might be some kind of directive that will be issued. But I think for now, in the absence of the regulations, there's no legal provision to apply it by law. But I think if we look at those commodities that have been designated, I think it's still government policy that it must be applied. And I think organs of state must apply those particular directives. And as I said, my advice would be to say the only way that we can apply it at this point is to make it a special condition of contract.
Right,
So
right,
furniture, it's for furniture put in as a special condition, you know.
Yeah.
And we know what the provisional special conditions are. So if you submit a tender and you don't comply with it, you are disqualified. But somehow there needs to be, you cannot just now say, okay, we are going to apply it. There needs to be an internal policy directive in this regard. So if you want to apply it as a special condition, it needs to be somehow approved by the accounting officer. Is that we still want to apply local production content. There's no legal basis to do it, but we as a department, when it comes to certain commodities where this and this is involved, we want to apply those circulars issued by National Treasury.
Thanks, Kevin. I've put another poll up. Thank you, everybody, for those that did participate in that first one, just on the turnaround time. I did note that, but there were some people that said that they couldn't actually submit their responses. This is just to maybe make this whole process even a little bit more complicated for everybody. And there is a solution to this, but if the Court comes back on Friday and says the suspension period that was discussed by the Supreme Court of Appeal continues, what will the impact be? What will you do? And I don't know if you've got any thoughts on this one, Kevin. Does it mean that you've got to go back and change your entire policy again, the process again, and bring 80, 20, 90, 10 back in? You know, what is it? What does it mean? I don't know if you've got any thoughts on this one. I do want to add that we've got a small group of people that I believe that will have no impact on. But any thoughts, Kevin?
Sean, I missed the first part of your question.
So what if the Court comes back on Friday and says the suspension period that the Supreme Court of Appeal granted on its order? Okay, so remember, this all comes back to 2nd of November, 2020. The Supreme Court of Appeal said that the preferential procurement regulations are invalid, but that order of invalidity they suspended for a period of 12 months. Then the Minister of Finance appealed that decision at the Con Court, and in theory that then put on hold that suspension of the order, and then the Constitutional Court then came on the 16th of Feb and said, oh, by the way, that suspension period ended on the 2nd of November, whereas everybody in the legal fraternity expected that it would kick in, it would continue. What if the Con Court comes back on Friday and says, by the way, we were wrong, the suspension period continues? Will organs of state have to revert then, change everything back again, back to 80-20, 90-10, do all that stuff? What will they have to do? Any thoughts on that one? And I see Sanele has raised his hand.
Yeah, so I just want to get clarity on the question. If you say does it continue until the 15th of February 2023?
Let's put on hold at the moment how long it's going to be for, because there is a legal debate on that question.
Yes.
Is whether it's 12 months or 10 months or it's the remaining period or they come back and they said, no, we made a mistake, 16th of February, we made a mistake, 2017 regulations apply. The order
still applies.
The order of suspension.
Yes.
The suspension of the order continues.
Yeah, it's still applicable.
Yeah.
So it means that the status quo that was applied
up until the 16th of February.
Yes, still
continues.
maintained.
Yeah.
So then we can still proceed to apply the provisions of the 2017 regulations.
They're going to have to go back and change everything again.
Yes, we'll have to go. So obviously then the exemption is not applicable anymore. Those policy directives, that they apply is not applicable anymore, because it should only be interim process, because the interim process would be until clarity is sought on the validity period of the Con Court, or until new regulations have been put in
So the exemptions are, it looks like somebody has got a permanent exemption, which is well done to you, but the exemptions typically fall away on one of those two conditions happening. Either the Con Court comes back and clarifies the suspension period, or number two, the Preferential Procurement Regulations 2022 are effective.
That's correct.
So they would have to do that. For those of you who have not yet applied, we have got a solution for you, but it is in the exemption process. Let's just ask Sanele to come in. Sanele, I don't know if you've got any perspectives to add.
I think Kevin covered quite a lot of what I was going to say. One thing I wanted to highlight is the tenders that were kept in abeyance will then have to proceed. If the Con Court comes back and say the status quo remains, the suspension of the judgment is then effective. So that would mean those tenders, if the practitioners did not cancel them and advertise them with the provisions of the exemption, they will then just have to continue with them as normal, how they started. But in a sense now, all the graded exemptions have this condition that they are valid until the Con Courts vary or clarifies the judgment, or if the regulations get promulgated. So either or, so as soon as they come in, they will then have to fall away. But now, the colleagues, I think that there is some tricky parts around this, because when you apply these things, it's always gonna be when all the tenders that have been advertised as soon as that decision is made. You see, once that decision was made and your tenders were already advertised, then you can continue with those. But those that were not yet advertised, then they will have to follow the new decision that has been taken. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Good one. Thanks, Sanele. Just on this point, yes, go ahead, Kevin.
Yes, I've made a note of the abundance issue. You remember earlier?
We said we'll come back to it.
I raised that issue and we said we'll get back to that. Now, those tenders that were kept in abeyance, it's the ones which were not advertised, the ones which have gone through evaluation, but could not be approved by BAC. So obviously, colleagues, internally in your department, municipality, or the entity, you should now relook at each one of those tenders. If those tenders were initiated on 2017 regulations, it means that you will have to revisit each one of them now. So once you get approval from the accounting officer in terms of the process going forward, which mechanism you're going to use, then you will have to look at each one of those tenders, whether they were kept in abeyance to be advertised, whether they were kept in abeyance after evaluation process. Each one will have to be re-evaluated individually. And my thinking on it would be cancel everything. You have to cancel everything because 2017 regulations, those provisions are not applicable anymore. The other issue now is because those commodities that you require were on the procurement plans of the previous financial year. If it's not on your procurement plan for the current financial year, and if it needs, and you're going to ask now, maybe for exemption from Treasury, then you'll have to include it onto the procurement plan for this financial year. So there are quite a few issues that you need to consider. So it's to cancel those previous cases, really look at the criteria of evaluation and check whether it needs to be included in the procurement plan for the new financial year, whether it's there or not. If it's not in the new procurement plan, you have to add it into that new procurement plan. Then another issue, Sean, I also just want to mention is your bid documents. Those bid documents that still makes provision for 2017 regulations. You'll have to review all those documents, and if you receive exemption, you will have to remove those documents that makes reference to 2017 regulations. So I trust that helps, Sean.
Thank you. You're answering a couple of the questions that were in the chat, and SPDs that make reference to the Preferential Procurement Regulations 2017, those need to be changed.
Yes.
So SPD 1 has got a reference in it to Preferential Procurement Regulation 2017. Just take that out. And then if you have got exemption on all provisions of the PPPFA, then 6.1 doesn't apply. You don't need to get the BBBE information via the 6.1. You can ask them for the BBBE information for your scorecard purposes, but don't use 6.1 because that's all related to the PPPFA. Kevin, can I just share with you my recommendation on the exemption? Because there are still a number of people, And it's interesting to see the poll that's come back on what happens if Concord comes back and says the suspension period continues. There's only 20% of you are ready. A third of you say that you're going to have to go back to your old policies, and there's 40% of you say that you don't know what you will do if Concord comes back and says. So the majority of people are going to have to change back or don't know what to do. There are two options in the exemptions application. One is that you apply for exemption on all provisions of the PPPFA. And the other one is that you apply for exemption. You apply for exemption on just the 3 provisions in the PPPFA that refer to the threshold. Is the sound going? I've got a massive fiber option here, and it's giving me hassles. So
you might just want to repeat it again, Sean.
Okay, thank you. Let's try again. So you ask for just exemption on the 3 provisions. You ask for just exemption on the 3 provisions that require regulations. The threshold provisions and the formula provision. Just ask for those for exemption on that, and Treasury are granting exemption on that basis. And if you do that, it means you can continue to apply 80-20. You can continue to apply 90-10. You can continue to use 2(1)(f) of the Act. You can do all of that. And there will be very little impact on you then when Treasury comes back. Henry, I'm not sure if, Kevin, I'm not sure if you got that.
Sean, I'm not sure whether I'm the only we lost you in terms of those recommendations. There was one which one recommendation which I got is the one for those 3 provisions.
Yes, yes. So you just ask for exemption on those 3 provisions.
Yes.
Which says that you can still use 80-20, 90-10. You can still use objective criteria. You can still use the Act. The framework still is in place. But technically, you don't need to wait for Treasury to tell you what the threshold is and what the formula is.
Okay.
And that allows you then to continue to apply the framework.
Yes.
And all you do then in your policy is just take out reference to 2017, and you still apply the same substance, and you still apply the same content that is in the 2017 regulations. And if Concord comes back, there's no change for you. There's no impact. You can continue. And I don't know, any thoughts on that one, Kevin? I mean, I know that's what we've been advising our clients to do, and they have received exemption. I don't know if
I think this.
Go ahead,
Sean. Yeah, I think there's nothing wrong with that. The fact that a lot of institutions have gone that route, and they have received the exemption from National Treasury, which means that Treasury is quite comfortable with the process.
Yeah.
So then there's the other process where you can apply for full exemption.
On all
that's
provisions.
Basically, for all provisions. So that's basically those 2 options.
Yeah.
The options that's available at this point in time.
Yeah. Okay. And just for those that are still online, amazing to see how many are still online, but those that are still online, that then has the least impact on you, whichever way the Concord goes. you don't have to then advise everybody on just doing price. That is a way. But it doesn't seem like the majority of people have got that. The majority of people have got full exemption.
Yes.
Kevin, this is an important topic, and we've gone way over our time, and I really want to thank you for your input today. I wonder if we're going to have a chance to invite you next week to join us when we talk about professionalization. Because it sounds like you were involved in the early days in getting that going. And
Yes.
I would certainly like you to join us next week if you can, Kevin.
Sean, I hope I'm not involved in an engagement at that time.
Good.
But if I am available, I will definitely join you.
Thanks
because
very much. Thank you.
I know Jeff very well.
Very good, very good. All right, everybody. Thank you. I don't know if there's any other questions that we could take. Let's just see if anyone else has any questions or comments. If not, go ahead, Sanele.
Thank you, Sean. Before you close, I just wanted to remind you that you said we will have this session where we're going to discuss the model policies that we are trying to come up with for the future of the preferential procurement. Obviously, it's inevitable that the organs of state must have their individual policies. So what I'm doing for KZN is to try and create a model policy to throw it out for adoption. And obviously, it's a flexible policy. Someone may pick it up, someone may don't, and it's not a prescriptive policy. But if I can run it with the colleagues, maybe other colleagues who are doing the same for their organs of state, we can just see, share some inputs and take things there and there, and we can consolidate and see how we can assist the country going forward.
Would be a fantastic topic to have, Sanele. Should we schedule that immediately for 2 weeks' time?
Sure. Yeah, because I was on leave.
1st of June. 1st of June.
Yeah. Now for me, I'm compatible. We can schedule because mine is probably 80% done, so the content
Fantastic.
is there.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Mr. Mashal. Thank you, Sanele. Mr. Mashal.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you, colleagues. Sorry to take you back, I've been in and out of these meetings. We are arranging for a presidential women's seminar on the 27th of this month. Therefore, I've been in that meeting and out of that meeting on the issue of the 40%. And that's exactly what I want to talk about. To say that currently, for those who are saying that they are not going to use preferential procurement in terms of the Constitution section 217 subsection 1 on equitable distribution of awarding contracts, of awarding government contracts. And secondly, the issue of the SONA pronouncement. How are we going to deal with that? Should it take at least maybe 8 months for us to finalize the regulations there for the whole of this year in terms of how are we going to advance the women and make sure that we procure 40% of the government spend from women? And then how are we going to deal with that part? Or are we going to say to the president, no, it's going to be a challenge for us based on the Concord decision? Because that's where we're having a problem. Like I'm saying, we are arranging a women seminar, and obviously they're looking for solutions from us to say, what are you doing to ensure that we advance women in terms of government procurement spend? Thank you. Maybe colleagues could add up, or they can think about it, and we can communicate by emails. Thank you, Sean.
Mr. Mashal, this is such an important question. And I think this is part of why Thandi was raising this as well. But let's just quickly ask Mr. Mashal, does the Preferential Procurement Regulations 2017 that we currently have, does that allow you to advance that 40% objective? My understanding is not.
Yeah. Yes, it was no, but it was assisting us to get to that, you know.
So,
in terms
so
of,
you could,
in terms of regulation 4.
You could use regulation 4, and you can through that regulation you can do it. Okay, it was assisting, but it wasn't necessarily hard enough, because regulation 4 didn't allow you to identify Black women-owned businesses. It was Black businesses. Here's a question. Do you think that instruction 3 maybe makes it a little bit more easier for organs of state now to do a deviation and deviate directly and have maybe a competitive deviation and just target Black women? Do you think that is something that we could start to explore? So we don't.
I doubt. I never thought they gave it a thought, but I doubt if I will go that route. I'm not sure, but the colleagues on the platform, I've got colleagues from Treasury as well on the platform. They could also assist. And I never thought of it, but I doubt if the head of Treasury will agree to go that. I'm not sure, but we can think about it.
Yeah, I think it's worth exploring. If I listened to the Concourt on the 25th of May, they said competition doesn't mean open competition. As long as there's competition, and they said that in response to the Fidelity guy that was saying, you've got to invite as many people as possible. And they came back twice and said, not necessarily, as long as there's competition. It doesn't mean that there's going to be competition amongst everybody. Was an interesting perspective. Okay. So we will put that back on the agenda. It is an important one, and that can also come up then in Sonele's discussion that we'll have on the 1st of June, Mr. Mashar, where we can talk about that specifically, because that would be an important one to get going. The 2017 regulations, the decision by the Concourt, actually, many are saying is going to help us advance women and youth far better than what the 2017 regulations had.
No, thanks. Thanks, bro.
Thank you, sir. Any comments on that one, Kevin?
Sean, yes, I think I agree with you. Maybe it should be a different session where this topic is discussed. I know I've raised this issue with National Treasury also.
Yeah.
And their argument is that it was only a letter, I think, that came from the Office of Youth, Women, Disabilities, etc. There's no clear directive. So they just said that, 40% of the procurement spend should go to women and to youth. There is nothing from National Treasury in that regard. So it was a general directive. It doesn't talk to anything. So Treasury said that currently at that stage, when I communicated them, 2017 regulations were still applicable. There was nothing which they received from the presidency that they have to now revise the regs. And even if we look at the regulation of 2022, there's nothing to that effect built in there.
Nothing.
Nothing to that effect. But they left it up to each and every accounting officer to determine their own directives, their own criteria, how they would go about. But I think at the next session, it will be useful to discuss it. I've got certain ideas on it.
You have.
So maybe when I'm available at that time, we can discuss it.
We're going to book you.
Yes.
I'll send through a meeting invite. And,
Okay, good.
very good. Thank you. Thank you. Godfrey, last one, and then we're going to close off.
Oh, Sean, yeah, I was just in doubt as well, because I think Kevin also indicated some of the elements that they needed to indicate. Né? Because what Mr. Mashao is indicating, or one way or the other, it was just information that the president was sharing, but it was never regulated somewhere. And more so, even in the PPR 2017, it was not put as such. As I indicated to you, Sean, yesterday, in terms of the new regulation that might be promulgated anytime from now, the 2022, where organ of state needs to put their own preferential processes. I think from Gauteng provincial government, they want to put it a uniformity. They want to suggest some of the elements that we need to look into in order to advance these particular preferences, like women, your youth, your people with disabilities in the whole procurement space. I think only then, when it's incorporated in the policies or the provisions from our own Gauteng Provincial Treasury, will be able to implement those preferences in our procurement activities. Otherwise, if you look back into what the president has said, I think in the absence of the provisions that guides us and on the way forward, it was very difficult to even implement such. So those are elements that are needed to indicate. But I think Kevin indicated very nicely. Yeah. It needs a specific day where we talk about those particular things, and so that we can incorporate the right things in the policies. Thanks, Sean.
Thank you. Good one. I think Mr. Mashar is saying that it's an appeal for help, because the last thing that we want to say at a women's forum is we wish we could help you, but the regulations don't say anything and don't really give us the power to do that. So we need to try and have some way to try and answer that question. And because I think we were criticized in the procurement community last year when that question came up again. We said, but there isn't any regulation that really supports us, so it's difficult for us to expedite that goal. Very good. Kevin, thank you, sir.
I'm good.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your wisdom. Thanks for sharing. We appreciate having a veteran in the procurement space and the state expenditure space. And thank you for your time, sincerely.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Very good. Did I miss another hand there? Ma'am, or was that Ma'am Yawa that raised her hand?
Yeah, thanks, Sean. I just wanted to indicate that one of the strategies that we can actually incorporate is the issue of skills development plan and the supplier development programs. If we have such, implement such documents, we will create such policy or plans, and then you apply it with your big tenders. And in most cases, it's much easier with big departments that have got a much bigger budget. And there are those where it's possible, and there are those departments where it will not be possible for them. It will depend on the type of the commodity that is being procured by the department at the time. Because maybe for treasury like us, we procure specialized services, your accountants and all those. Here and there, it will not be possible, and all that we have to do is to identify those projects. But there are other projects like your Department of Public Works, your education, health, your CATA and others. It will be much more easier if they've got such programs. Thank you, Sean.
Very good, very good. Thank you very much. Thank you. All right, everybody. Next week, we're going to talk about professionalization. We hope to have that. We've been trying to get that done, but I've just not been able to get people to attend that. And but it looks like we've got that firmed up for next week. So we'll do that. And then the 1st of June, we'll have a discussion then around this point that Sonele had raised around putting the preferential procurement policy together for the new world that might be coming soon. So if there is any response that comes back from the Concourt on the suspension period clarity question, which is put to them, and it requires an urgent discussion, we will then invite everybody to that and get that going as quickly as we can. We won't necessarily wait for next Wednesday to tackle that one, because it could be something that could be urgent. So again, if anyone wants to just keep in the loop on how things are going, we do have a Telegram group that you can join as well. I know Kevin is on that and he contributes, and we've got one for MFMA as well as for PFMA, and those are certainly an option as well. So thank you very much again, Kevin. All the best to you, and yeah, we'll hope to see you again back on this platform soon.
Thank you very much, Sean.